The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, you'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
Welcome back to Ryedale again, everybody. Now we're beginning this episode in a village that's still controlled by a family who have historic connections to this place. Behind me you can see there's a board which tells you about a little industrial estate. It's called Fold Court, and this is at the western end of this place. And you can see there's an email address halfway down that board that says george@windarley.net. Now the Windarleys are descendants of the ancient Darley family who are still involved in this village. This is the parish of Buttercrambe with Bossall. Buttercrambe with Bossall, rich land in a river bend with Botsnook. Today in Ryedale we're moving closer to York as we take on two villages that have been linked to each other for centuries. They would be Buttercrambe and Bossall, which form a single parish located 9 miles to the northeast of the city. Buttercrambe's name doesn't have anything to do with butter. Rather, its literal translation from Old English is a rich piece of land in a river bend. Cram, the second part of the name, is an old word meaning meander or bend in a river, and in this case it's the Derwent. Because it lies on water, it should perhaps be no surprise that Buttercrambe once had a watermill. It's still on the riverside today and is one of the village's Grade 2 listed buildings. In the centre of the village is Aldby Park. That's associated with the Darley family and by extension the Darley Arabian. We'll cover that here too. To the west, on a patch of higher ground, are the remains of a Roman camp constructed some 20 years before the establishment of Roman York in 71 AD. Also in Buttercrambe are the remains of a castle which fell to the parliamentarians during a skirmish in the English Civil War. As for Bossall, that's much smaller than Buttercrambe but still has a lot to talk about. Its name is derived from a 7th century bishop named Bosa of York who built its first church. In 1807, a hoard of Viking silver coins and objects were discovered between Bossall and Flaxton. It was called the Bossall-Flaxton Hoard. We've also got Bossall Hall to discuss, as well as the ancient family who once owned it. There's loads in this one, so we'd better get going. This is Buttercrambe and Bossall. We start today's episode with the village of Buttercrambe, the larger of the two within Buttercrambe and Bossall. Buttercrambe means rich land in a river bend, so the most logical place to start is with the river itself. The Derwent makes a welcome return to TVI. Where there's a river, Watermills were never far away. Buttercrambe made use of its watery location very well to that end. It once had a water-powered corn mill that's now a Grade 2 listed building. The former mill has a date stone of 1697 and it was converted into a house in the 1980s. Cited on a mill race, it was last on the market almost a decade ago, and at that time it had a guide price of £300,000. That's a snip if you ask me. The mill is built of brick and has a pan-tile roof. Inside, many of the original floor beams survive, and there's a 20th century iron spiral staircase. Also Grade 2 listed is the bridge we're stood on here, over the river. There's a bit less to say about this though. It's 18th century and it's made of dressed sandstone. It has two segmental arches divided by a cutwater, forming a refuge above. Nicholas Pevsner noted it in his work, but I don't think he was terribly enamoured with it. Nonetheless, its importance to Buttercrambe can't be denied. Without it, you'd have to go the long way round to get anywhere to the east. Well, it's certainly one of those bridges that you can't take at speed. You wouldn't dare with these massive blocks here marking the entrance to both sides of it. These things are designed to make sure that vehicles wider than 2.2 metres don't cross the bridge. I mean, if this is 2.2 metres, I'll be amazed. It just feels a lot less than that, but apparently it is. And my car fits through, so we're all good. Right, let's continue our wander through Buttercrambe. And behind me there is our next landmark, or part of our next landmark. Let's explain. The origins of Buttercrambe Castle are a little unclear, but it appears fortifications may have been present at this site for many centuries. Some of the earthworks that remain here today originate from prehistoric times. The Normans are known to have constructed a motte and bailey castle on the site, and a licence to crenellate was issued to William de Esterville in 1201. The castle was upgraded in the 14th century before being replaced by a house and gardens in the 17th century. Those today are Aldby Park and its surroundings. Buttercrambe Castle had some interesting features. For a start, it had a 14th century quadrangular tower, which was rare. Typically, keeps of the period had squared towers, sometimes constructed at an angle. Other castles, particularly those in North Yorkshire that were built in the same period, also had squared towers and no double curtain wall. That made this one at Buttercrambe unique. The Great Hall was impressive. It measured 105 metres from north to south and 70 metres from east to west. Today, a dry ditch shows where the castle's moat was. It remains an obstacle and suggests that at its peak it was 10 metres wide by 2.5 metres deep. This would have acted as a deterrent to mining operations and prevented use of siege weapons. 3 sides of the castle had an outer court or bailey extending outwards. This in turn was surrounded by an outer moat, which was 8 metres wide and 2 metres deep. Whoever lived here really didn't want people getting in. Though the castle was demolished in the 17th century, its imprint, foundations, earthworks and moat are all visible to the naked eye. In the centre of Buttercrambe village is its pride and joy, Aldby Park. It's a country estate which for many years has been the seat of the Darley family, and this has got a heck of a lot to it, so bear with me here. The current building, a small listed Georgian mansion at the centre of the estate, is known as Aldby Park. It stands in the same spot as an original Tudor building and was built in around 1725 by Jane Darley. It occupies an ancient site, however, which is believed to be where Edwin of Northumbria was crowned king in 625 AD. The house was requisitioned by the army during World War II and suffered severely, but was renovated after the war by Mark Wynne. He passed it on to his son George whilst continuing to live there. The Wynnes, or Wynne Darleys as they are now, are direct descendants of the family. The Darley family's best known member is Thomas, Jane's brother, who owned the celebrated Darley Arabian. That was a horse widely recognised as being the earliest ancestor of most of the world's thoroughbred racehorses. The Darley Arabian was bought in Aleppo, Syria, and shipped to Aldby Park as a present for Thomas's brother. The Darley Arabian was one of 3 dominant foundation sires, the other 2 being the Byerley Turk and the Godolphin Arabian, the latter of which we've met before in Suffolk. The Darley Arabian was the leading sire in all of Great Britain and Ireland by 1722. By all accounts, he was 15 hands high and was of substantial beauty and refinement. Inside Aldby Park, there still remains a life-size portrait of the horse itself. So far, we've only walked about a quarter of a mile, and already we've taken in a lot. Buttercrambe doesn't have much more, though. In fact, between here and the other end of civilization, there's only one more landmark of note, and that would be the church. St John the Evangelist Church is tucked away down a grassy path. It's not the original, which would have stood here in the 13th century, but it's still pretty old. Most of it is 15th century. The original was probably built in around 1240, and you can see evidence of a number of alterations since that time. The building is Grade 2 listed. It's made of limestone and sandstone and has a Westmoreland slate roof. Because it was rebuilt in the 15th century, that explains why the east window is perpendicular in style. The last time it was heavily restored was between 1878 and 81. The architect is unclear, but it may have been either Hodgson Fowler or Temple Moore. Buttercrambe has only ever had one churchyard, and it's the one we're currently in. There exists a record dated 1404 that states a woman by the name of Johanna Bulmer was buried here. We have no way of knowing where, but somewhere in here her ancient grave is under your very feet. The church was, and still is, a chapel of ease within the ecclesiastical parish of Bossall. For a time too, it was part of the Darley estate until it was given back to the York Diocese in the 1980s. Well, there's some fabulous wall tablets in here. There's one right in the corner above the altar, which I can't read because it's too dark. But the one behind me here is an important one because this mentions Henry Darley, who, of course, we've already been talking a lot about already. That's a tablet to his memory right there. Okay, let's move on out of this churchyard because we now need to go to Bossall. And Bossall has its own church, which is a little bit different to this one, shall we say. Now we have a short drive between the villages of Buttercrambe and Bossall. Whilst Buttercrambe has most of the interesting bits and bobs in this parish, don't let that put you off visiting Bossall. It has its own, and some carry quite an importance. Let's go and check them out. The name Bossall has Saxon origins. It was drawn from the name of a 7th century bishop named Bosa of York, because it's believed he built a church here. In the Domesday Book, Bossall is recorded as Boshall and Bossial in the hundred of Bulford, and at that time it was held by Hugh Fitzbaldrick. There were 19 residents back then, which sounds tiny, but in 11th century England that was something approaching a metropolis. By 1823, Bossall had only 31 residents, and they all lived in 3 houses. Archaeological evidence showed at the time that the village was previously much larger. It's thought it was devastated by the Black Death in 1349. Like Buttercrambe, centuries ago the community included a quadrangular castle. It was built in the 1300s by Paulinus de Bossall and was replaced by the current manor house built in the 17th century. Stone from the original castle walls was used in that project. So this is Bossall, and let me tell you, parking is a little bit of a challenge in this place because, well, there's hardly any. I have found a spot though, which is between the 2 main landmarks in this place. One of them is the church, which is behind the camera. The other one is in front of the camera because these two are basically dead opposite each other. This one here is Bossall Hall. Now this has got a story to tell. So, all of that means today Bossall has 2 landmarks that point to its past. One is the church, the other is the manor house. The latter of the 2 is known as Bossall Hall. After the days of Paulinus de Bossall, the manor was held by the Redman or Redmayne family, before later passing by marriage to the Thwaites. In 1620 it was sold to William Belt, and it was around this time that Bossall Hall was built to replace that castle. The hall was built on the moated island which formerly housed the castle. The man responsible was Robert Belt, who probably reused building materials from the castle to do so. It was partly rebuilt in the 18th century, and its external appearance now dates to that period. Although the Belts were dispossessed following the English Civil War, the family continued to hold the manor until the late 1880s. The building was Grade 2 listed in 1953, and the site, including the largely still intact moat, was made a scheduled monument in 1993. The house is built of brick with an M-shaped tile roof. Inside there's an 18th century wooden staircase and wooden panelling in the central room of similar date. It was put up for sale in 2020 with a guide price of more than £2 million. Ecclesiastically, Bossall is the smallest parish in Yorkshire, and this church seems lost in a bit of a time warp. It's a late 12th century building, built to a cruciform plan with a sturdy central tower. The first church here was founded by Bosa, the Archbishop of York, between 678 and 705 AD. As many as 3 earlier churches may have occupied this site before the current building. That's pretty mental when you think about it, but what makes this even more impressive is that Bosa's church wouldn't have been here. That first church is thought to have stood next to Bossall Hall and was part of a royal vill or palace, protected by a moated enclosure. The vill was later replaced by the Norman castle, which was then replaced by the hall, as we already know. The current church has a 12th century doorway and font and has stained glass by Kemp. In the chancel floor is a partial brass to Robert Constable, he of the powerful Constable family, which we met in several East Riding episodes. It also has 3 late 17th and early 18th century monuments in the chancel and lovely transitional stonework in the crossing. The font is an interesting transitional design on 12th century columns and a base, topped by a Jacobean cover. On the north wall is a richly painted royal coat of arms dating from 1710. It's always good to see a historic building being restored, isn't it? And thanks to the Heritage Lottery Fund, the one here in Bossall is having some much needed work done to it. I'm not quite sure what, I haven't asked the guys because they seem to be busy. But yeah, it's nice, isn't it, to see that happening. Let's move on to the next one here in Ryedale. Now, I know I keep saying this, almost to the point of absurdity, but you don't need to visit the major UK cities to find out things about England's past. Buttercrambe and Bossall stand testament to the importance of our rural locales, and through Aldby Park, the 2 castles and the 2 churches, that significance is plain to see. Join me tomorrow for another? Yeah, why not? Now, just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.